Hello, I'm Denver 7's Micah Smith, and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters of Denver and Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our goal today is to present a ballot issue forum as we gear up for the election on Tuesday, November 8th. Among the decision items for voters on this year's ballot is Initiated Ordinance number 307, which asks Denver voters if property owners should be charged a fee for the construction and maintenance of sidewalks citywide. Our format for this forum will follow a basic debate outline with opening and closing statements, dialogue between the speakers, and will include responses to questions submitted by the forum organizers. Let's begin by meeting the participants who will present and discuss the pros and cons of Initiated Ordinance number 307. Beginning at my right is Jonathan Pira, a Denver resident who resides in Council District 3 in West Denver. And Mr. Pira will be speaking for the ordinance question. And on my left is Denver City Council member Kevin Flynn, who represents Southwest Denver's District 2. Mr. Flynn will be speaking against the ordinance. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
We will begin with 1 minute and 30-second opening statements from both speakers. And as you can see, your speaker timers are right out in front of both of you. And the timer will start counting down when you have a minute left. So, Mr. Pira, you're up first speaking for Initiated Ordinance number 307, and you have a minute and a half.
Great. Thank you. Any Denver resident can tell you our sidewalks are in disrepair. Nearly half of Denver streets have missing or substandard sidewalks, with most of these in low-income neighborhoods. When sidewalks are missing, too narrow, or in bad repair, it is often difficult, if not impossible, for those with disabilities and older adults to move around our city, effectively trapping them in their homes. Under current policies, property owners are responsible for the full cost of sidewalk repairs whenever inspected. As the Denver Auditor assessed in 2020, this unfairly and inconsistently burdens property owners with sudden, surprise bills in the thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. Current policy has no recourse for those with low or fixed incomes who must pay those high bills immediately. If we don't change course, it will take over 400 years to create a complete sidewalk network, with most of that cost shouldered by the low-income neighborhoods where unsafe streets exist today. Residents who are least likely to be able to afford these costs of sudden surprise construction bills. By publicly funding the cost, we can make our city more equitable, fair, and safer for all. The many organizations that endorse this measure have been fighting for nearly 2 decades for dedicated sidewalk funding, yet no mayor or council has offered a proposal to comprehensively fix our sidewalks, instead choosing to leave today's inequitable, unaffordable, and ultimately insufficient policy in place. Denverites deserve better. It's time for the city to take responsibility for its infrastructure. Thank you.
And now the opening statement from Kevin Flynn, who's speaking against the Initiated Ordinance.
Thank you, Micah. All of the many people who oppose this initiative, including former Mayor Wellington Webb, agree with the proponents that safe and accessible sidewalks need to be available all over Denver. But that doesn't mean that just any package wrapped in a catchy slogan will do it. We disagree with the methods and means of this proposal. It is so poorly structured, it is doomed to fail, but not before harming so many working families and low-income households slammed with sidewalk fees of several hundred to nearly $1,000 payable each and every year. Fees that will only accelerate displacement in our vulnerable neighborhoods and pile even more costs onto struggling families. This initiative underestimates the cost, sets an unachievable time frame, and inequitably gives discounts to affluent households in gentrifying neighborhoods while charging full price to poor ones elsewhere. The backers of 307 tell us that they can accomplish in 9 years what they say it would take the city 400 years to do. Think about the absurdity of trying to cram 400 years of work into 2% of the time. Can you say cost overruns? The math just doesn't work, even if you handed a hard hat and a shovel to every man, woman, and child in Denver. This boondoggle needs to fail. If we want sidewalks for everyone, we need a real-world proposal that treats people equitably, and this one does not.
Now, Kevin, you will have 1 minute in which you can offer a rebuttal of Mr. Pira's opening statement or expand on your opening statement.
Thank you. No one can argue with the need for better sidewalks. Denver is committed to accessible sidewalks and is slowly building them out. Our argument is that this proposal is inherently inequitable. It pretends to be a user fee for service, but it's actually a provider fee. Charging people based on the length of their sidewalk is like charging them for their street repaving based on the length of the street in front of their house rather than on the user fee-based gas tax. While supporters speak of a typical fee of just over $100 per property, the truth is much, much uglier. There are thousands of homeowners who will have to shell out upward of $1,000 every year, and they will never live to see their own sidewalks replaced. The Denver Democratic Party Central Committee recently voted to reject supporting this initiative, 100 to 69. The voters of Denver should do likewise, and let us develop a plan that can actually work.
Jonathan, you now have 1 minute in which you can offer a rebuttal of Kevin's opening statement or expand on your opening statement.
Certainly. I'd like to use this opportunity to discuss the commitment that Councilman Kevin Flynn just mentioned. As I stated in my opening statement, for 20 years now, we've been asking City Council and the Mayor to come up with a real, viable plan to move along a complete and comprehensive network. We say that Councilman Flynn says that Council can do this anytime, and yet we still haven't seen it happen despite years of lobbying, years of argumentation. This is a good moment to consider that should this measure pass, just like with the Green Roofs Initiative, City Council would have the ability to make adjustments to the program, like how the fee is structured, who qualifies, how the discount is levied, and more. The campaign and its supporters would be happy to work with Council to make sure we achieve our goals. We put a lot of effort into crafting as equitable and thoughtful of an ordinance as possible, but we aren't so arrogant as to think it's absolutely perfect and couldn't be improved with implementation over time.
And now we move to our one-on-one rounds, and our speakers will have some choices when it's their turn. And beginning with Jonathan, you can ask Kevin a direct question, and Kevin, you'll have 1 minute to answer that question. Or, Jonathan, you may take that minute to expand on a previous statement.
Certainly. All right. Councilman Flynn, we know traffic fatalities are increasing in Denver, and people walking are 30 times more likely to die compared to people in cars. This year alone, 22 people have been killed while walking. How can we prevent these fatalities from happening and make our cities safe for people on foot without providing sidewalks, the most basic pedestrian infrastructure?
Oh, I certainly believe in providing sidewalks, Jonathan. And I understand that the city has been too slowly doing it. It's very expensive and much more complicated engineering-wise than this initiative would have us believe. The Hollywood sidewalks in neighborhoods like Brentwood give you 2.5 feet of walking space. My wife and I cannot even walk side by side on them. They have to be improved. This initiative cannot do it for the fee that's charged and the time frame that is indicated. Mm-hmm. So yes, we should provide those sidewalks. We should be more intentional. And in fact, when you mention that the council hasn't done it and you wanted to see it happen more quickly, I wish that the proponents had come to DOTI, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and talked about your proposal and tried to fit it within the processes and the capacity of the city to do this work, instead of just putting it on the table, written in stone for the voters, and then expecting us to fix it like the Green Roofs disaster of a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now, Kevin, you can ask Jonathan a direct question. And Jonathan, you'll have 1 minute to answer that question. Or you may take the minute to expand on a previous statement.
Thank you, Micah. Jonathan, what are the names of the engineering, construction, and financial consultants you worked with to develop the cost estimate schedule and the amortization for this $850 million proposal? And will you release their reports so that the public can decide whether this is actually realistic? If there are no such reports, can you show your work on how you came up with these numbers?
Certainly, would love to take that question. We'll note that I am not a member of the group who did these calculations, so I'm not the one who can say these are the names, and I can't say that we are happy to release. I don't represent the campaign. I am a District 3 resident. However, I can tell you that I have seen the work done, and I do know that it was done with members of the professional industry that I've spoken with, both land use and transportation consultants and lawyers who work on the bonding of these projects, and have clarified how bonding, city bonding, in a capital ordinance like this can work over time with worksheets to prove it. We've used cost estimates from both local and distant engineering companies for these estimates, and I would like like to clarify, per that last question, that we did, in fact, go to the department and try to work this in with a schedule that would work with their timelines, with their planning and the existing structure. We didn't see a lot of success there. And I think that that's when it came time to put something forward, something that we thought was well considered, or as well considered as it could be, without, frankly, all that much help from the city.
And now we will continue with another round. And Kevin, you will begin. You can ask Jonathan a direct question, and Jonathan, you will have a minute to answer that question, or you may take a minute to expand on a previous statement.
Thank you, Micah. I've researched the extremely disparate impacts that your proposal has on families who, for instance, live on corner lots or whose backyards back up to arterial streets. I've heard this extreme disparity justified by saying, well, these people can walk on any sidewalk all over the city, so this is fair, and when their lengthy sidewalks need to be repaired, they won't have to pay for it. And right now, they'd have to come up with the entire cost. But in fact, though, most of these people will never have to replace or repair their sidewalks. Your initiative instead saddles them annually with paying $300, $500, $800, or $1,000 for a service they will not live to see. This isn't a user fee, it's a provider fee. How can you justify the extreme disparity among similarly situated households?
Certainly. I would like to start by clarifying that this is in fact a user fee. It's based on the usage of the land of our city, a limited resource that we all share and that we own in part and parcel. I would also note that some of those costs that you've outlined, especially nearing that $1,000 situation, they're extreme outliers based on what we see around the city. It is nothing like the typical lot. It is nothing like what the typical person will need to pay. What I will note as well is many of these people in these communities who, yes, will have to pay the part for the land that they use, are facing these unsafe situations today. They are often not able to walk on sidewalks. We're looking at safety for older adults who need to get around their neighborhoods. We're looking at safety for the disabled who need to get around these neighborhoods. And we're looking for safety for the young mothers who are currently pushing strollers in streets, because many of these sidewalks people don't have to pay for now are too narrow and cannot support strollers or wheelchairs. This is an initiative that will help all users of Denver's land, including those who own larger parcels of it.
And back to Jonathan. And again, you can ask Kevin a direct question, and Kevin, you will have 1 minute to answer the question, or you may take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement.
Certainly. The sidewalk fee is modeled after the current stormwater fee that all property owners in Denver pay. Like the proposed sidewalk fee, the stormwater fee is based on the cost of providing infrastructure that serves each property, given the characteristics of that property, and funds the construction and repair of stormwater infrastructure citywide. If the stormwater fee was on the ballot today, would you also oppose it?
I fundamentally disagree, Jonathan. That's incorrect. The stormwater fee is an actual user fee because it reflects the cost of the runoff from my property and your property and everyone else's for the city to treat and carry that away to the Platte River. This instead is nothing like that. This has nothing to do with how much the owner of that property walks around the rest of the city. It strictly has to do with how much frontage that owner has on a city street. It is nothing like a user fee. It is in fact a provider fee because you're making that corner lot, and there are thousands of them. You call them an extreme outlier, but the fact is there are thousands of them around the city who will have to pay enormous amounts every year without ever seeing a sidewalk repair because their sidewalks are in perfect condition. It is a provider fee. They are providing the infrastructure for the rest of the public to walk on, not a user fee at all.
Another round, and Jonathan, you will begin. Again, you can ask Kevin a direct question, and Kevin, you'll have 1 minute to answer the question. You may take 1 minute to expand on a statement.
Certainly. Given the audited failures of our existing program and the long history of lobbying for safe sidewalks in the city, why should voters have any confidence that, if this ordinance doesn't pass, the mayor or city council will take action soon to comprehensively address Denver's sidewalk problems, and we won't be stuck with the status quo for more decades, possibly centuries to come?
I think the assertion, which I would agree with qualifiedly because I haven't done the math, the assertion that it would take up to 400 years or more to do what this initiative wants to do in 9 years, I'll take that at face value. That just demonstrates the enormity of the problem. What I would like to do in a neighborhood like Brentwood that has those Hollywood curbs, unlike what this ordinance would do, you would expand the sidewalk into the property owner's front yard. Although this provides no funding to restore the landscaping or the irrigation systems or the driveway pads of those owners. What I would like to do is take the time to expand those sidewalks out into the streets, like Irving Street or Lowell, and narrow the carriageway for the cars that are currently speeding, because we built our streets way too wide in the 40s and the 50s. This proposal doesn't even provide enough funding to do that. The fact is, Jonathan, it's going to take many, many years. We are willing to sit down with the proponents and craft a reasonable program to do that.
And back to you, Kevin. As before, you can ask Jonathan a direct question, and Jonathan, you'll have 1 minute to answer the question, or you may take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement.
Thank you, Mike. I think instead of expanding, we're all asking each other questions. So your initiative gives a 20% discount off the fee to property owners in gentrifying neighborhoods, so designated by the city's Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Team. This creates an incredibly inequitable situation in that the very same affluent new households that have contributed to the displacement of working families by driving housing prices skyward, they get the same 20% discount that gentrification has caused to be required. But low-income households outside those nest neighborhoods, they have to pay 100%. Why would you design a discount program that rewards wealthier households that contributed to the displacement, but hits working families elsewhere with the entire amount?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it, actually. We did look at this very closely. We worked with organizations who are often working with these communities that have language barriers, that have financial barriers, that have technology barriers. And what we will learn from them and leading research on the matter is that means testing programs are not currently, as structured today, the way to go here. People with technology barriers and with language barriers are unlikely to ever find that they qualify for these programs. So we end up missing the people that need it most. Yes, this is a bit of a shotgun approach. We are going to give discounts to some people who don't need it, but more people in these neighborhoods have not yet been displaced, and we can help by reducing the burden on them now. I would note that I would love to see a program from the city where application to live or other means testing programs would automatically qualify you for other elements. In speaking with the city attorney's office, we've learned that the current consideration is that agencies cannot share that PHI, personal information, across organizations, right. So we could not pursue a program like that. I would actually love to do so, frankly.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it is time to move on to our next rounds, which will feature our speakers responding to questions submitted by our forum organizers, and they will have 1 minute to respond. We will begin with Jonathan Piero, who is here speaking in support of Initiated Ordinance 307, which asks Denver voters if property owners should be charged a fee for the construction and maintenance of citywide sidewalks. So your first question, Jonathan, is: what are the consequences for non-payment of the fee?
Certainly. So there are a few elements of recourse, and this is actually a great time to introduce for those who have some concern about the fee, do feel that they are in low or fixed income and have an inability to pay. This ordinance does allow them to defer the fee, the payment of that fee, until the time of sale of the property. As we know, Denver housing prices have gone up for many years, a lot of equity in a lot of people's homes. We are able to delay that fee payment until a later time. If for some reason we think that that's not going to work, even though that can push the fee many, many years, even decades down the road, theoretically, the city could put a lien on the property. But as our own department that we spoke to about this ordinance with mentioned, that's always the city's last resort. And even when a lien occurs, actual, taking of a home is truly the last resort. They work out payment plans, they work out other items. This deferment was a key element of this ordinance because we were trying to avoid any displacement. We were trying to avoid liens on homes. We were trying to help fixed and low-income families.
All right. And now Kevin Flynn, who is here speaking against Initiated Ordinance number 307. Here is your first question. Do you feel the status quo on sidewalk repair is adequate?
Was that it? Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off. Absolutely not. I agree fully that we need to step it up. We need to do a lot more. I wish that the proponents had worked with us because it's a lot more expensive than, and the answer to that last question demonstrates that, if enough property owners defer their fee to their equity when they cash out, then that puts a big hole in the financing plan for this $850 million that they want to borrow, which won't be sufficient, by the way. In my district in Marley, I finally convinced, after about 4 years of lobbying Dottie, I finally convinced them to put sidewalks on Hazel Court and Iowa Avenue, where none have existed, the gravel shoulders. They are 3 years in conception to construction. They are at 60% design, and the cost estimate right now is $4.6 million for 1,900 feet of sidewalk, because in those neighborhoods you also have to install drainage systems. It's going to take a lot more work than is imagined here.
And our next question from our organizers is for you, Kevin. You'll respond first, and you have 1 minute to answer. How do you see the sidewalks that are non-ADA compliant being repaired at a greater pace under the current system?
Money, a lot more money. General fund money, general fund allocations perhaps. As I said in response to an earlier question, my desire would be that when we widen these inadequate sidewalks, we widen them out into the street to narrow the streets that are conducive to speeding, that invite speeding. That's the top complaint most council offices get, is speeding in the neighborhoods. Instead of pushing them into homeowners' front yards and incurring those expenses, I think it's a huge wasted opportunity. That is going to be much costlier, by the way, than just putting them into people's yards, because pushing the curb line out into the street will require regrading, maybe doing a different cross section of that street for drainage. Much, much more expensive, but it's the right thing to do. It's going to take more than 9 years. It's probably going to take more than 20 years, but we can do it in less than, I'm sure we can do it in less than 400.
Right. And now, Jonathan, your next question. How many sidewalks will the additional service charge repair or replace in the first year?
It's a good question. First year, actually, a very limited number. Under the construction of the ordinance, time is given and flexibility is given to the department to figure out how to best approach this. We have tiered priority based on existing city plans. We will say the most unsafe streets, the missing sidewalks, especially near prime destinations like schools and parks, will be fixed first. We also give the department a lot of leeway. In contrast to the point made earlier, this ordinance explicitly allows, gives the department flexibility to determine what's feasible in situations with landscaping. We could build or widen the sidewalk into the street versus the property, and it would, in fact, cover any costs required as part of the sidewalk construction, like changes to landscaping. So with all that in mind, we do want to use economies of scale here. This will be large, big purchase orders, big bids, big contracting. In the first year, I actually think remarkably little will get done as we prepare to make big progress in years 2 through 9.
And that brings us to the end of our Q&A segment, and we move now to closing statements. Each speaker will have 1.5 minutes for closing statements, and we will reverse the order of the opening statements, which means we will begin with Kevin Flynn. Kevin, you have 90 seconds for your closing statement.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Jonathan. Every time you turn around in this city lately, you find new fees and charges that make it harder and harder to afford to live here. This new sidewalk fee is harsher than most because of the extreme disparity in how it charges households of similar means. I walked into the Bear Valley King Supers last week when I was stopped by an 85-year-old Latino fellow whose property I had included in my research. If 307 passes, he and his 84-year-old wife will have to come up with an additional $832 a year, effectively a 50% increase in his current property taxes. Yet his sidewalks are in perfect condition. Meanwhile, his neighbor across the street and one door down would pay $191, less than 1/4 his amount. Why? Well, in large part because Sheridan Boulevard is behind his backyard fence. Manuel begged me to do what I can do to find a better way. And that's why I'm here opposing 307. Those of us who have concluded it is poorly drafted and will incur huge cost overruns and delays don't disagree with the end goal of accessible sidewalks citywide. We do disagree with the methods and means that 307 mandates. You can't compress what currently would take 400 years to complete into 9 years based on a back-of-the-napkin math. On November 8, join me, former Mayor Wellington Webb, 100 members of the Denver Democratic Party Central Committee, and thousands of your cost-burdened neighbors, and do not support Initiative 307. Too much, too soon. Thank you.
And now a closing statement from Jonathan Pira. And Jonathan, you have 90 seconds for your response.
Certainly. I'd like to echo my thanks to the organizers of the event and Councilman Flynn for speaking with you tonight. I would like to start by asking you to consider, if such a strong negative impact on those with low and fixed incomes were real, why would this measure be endorsed by groups like the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, who represent people with disabilities, a group well known to have many fixed income and low-income members. Why would it be endorsed by Unite North Denver Metro or the Valverde Neighborhood Association? This idea of an unfair burden is a red herring, and detractors know it. Those who are facing the inability to move around our city on a daily basis, who live with fear of being hit by cars in the street, know the sidewalk network is worth the cost. Detractors also say they agree sidewalks are important, but that the money should come from somewhere else in the city budget. Notably, they've never identified what they expect to cut from our existing budget to build sidewalks. Will we sell parks, close libraries? Find the money somewhere else isn't a serious solution. I want to reiterate that this ordinance can be modified by council as they identify tweaks and improvements to adjust, and the backers of the initiative would be happy to help with that. This is about safety. Safety for older adults, safety for people with disabilities, safety for young mothers pushing strollers in the street. This is also about saving Denverites time, money, and hassle. Having the city purchase and build sidewalks is both less expensive and less hassle than asking each individual homeowner to handle it themselves. This ordinance will help right the wrongs of the past by ensuring the burden of paying for fixing sidewalks doesn't fall only on the shoulders of the neighborhoods we've never invested in to begin with, and that we allowed sidewalks to fall apart in. Please join me in voting yes on Measure 307. Thank you.
And on behalf of the forum organizers, I'd like to thank both of you for your participation in this forum. Our thanks also to the Denver Decides partners, which include Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. We hope we have given you a fair look at the pro and con arguments for initiated Ordinance 307. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. Let your voice be heard. Be sure you are registered, and be sure and vote. For complete election information online, go to www.denverdecides.org. I'm Micah Smith from Denver 7. Thanks for joining us.